I am Dawn Yankeelev, Executive Director of TALK, Technology Association of Louisville, Kentucky. And we're going to take a look in the world of non-fungible tokens, NFTs, today with Courtney Perrin. Courtney, give us a little bit of your background and then we'll jump in.
Hi, thanks, Dawn. My background is that I am a fintech member at the law firm Frost Brown Todd. I'm located in Nashville, Tennessee. And I spend most of my days working to help companies do things like contracts, corporate formation, and evaluate compliance. And a large majority of that right now is in the blockchain or cryptocurrency or NFT arena.
Very good. Well, let's jump into the world of NFTs.
Sounds good. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here this morning, and I hope that everybody at Techfest is having a great time and enjoying what I know is a great conference. Today, we're going to be talking about the general overview of NFTs. What is an NFT? What's the volume of NFTs? What's the technology behind them? How do you mint one? How do you sell one? Are there legal considerations to consider? And are there tax issues to consider? Because, of course, we cannot forget taxes, the ever-occurring theme. So first off, what's a non-fungible token? I find it easiest to break that down into the words. So the tokens are cryptographic tokens. Those are tokens that reside on a blockchain. For those of you who are not super familiar with blockchains, that's just a system in which a record of transactions are maintained across several computers that are linked in a peer-to-peer network. Some of those have thousands upon thousands of computers. Some of them are a bit more centralized and might have a more limited number of computers. There are two types of tokens, fungible and non-fungible. Not gonna lie, I've used the word fungible more in the past 18 months than I've ever used in my entire life. So when I first heard of NFTs, I said, you know what? I don't really know what the word fungible means, and people keep throwing it around. And maybe I'm the only one who doesn't know that, but I wanted to look it up. So I went to Merriam-Webster, and fungible is something that is interchangeable, fixable, where you can replace one with another and it's all the same. And then it made a lot more sense what the difference was between non-fungible tokens and general cryptographic tokens, like Bitcoin, that we're more familiar with. Bitcoin is the longest standing cryptocurrency. It's also the most famous blockchain. And it's a cryptocurrency that can be used as a currency throughout the world. And most blockchain protocols, you may have heard of some of the other ones like Ethereum or Solana, also have tokens that are native to that blockchain and are used to validate transactions within that chain. Those Bitcoin, Ethereum, things of that sort are completely interchangeable. Think of those like the US dollar. If I give you a US dollar and then in a few minutes I say, you know what, on second thought, I feel good about that US dollar I gave you. I'm going to give you another one from my wallet. You might think I'm a bit odd for requesting that, but you're probably not going to have an actual problem with the transaction because either way you have a US dollar to spend. NFTs are different. They're not fungible. They are completely unique. They are transferable like Bitcoin and blockchain, and they can be owned and they can be verified on the blockchain, but they are unique assets. So think of an NFT like a piece of art. If you have the Mona Lisa and I have a piece of art that I purchased at Home Goods, you're probably not going to want to make the trade. And that would be totally fair. So let's look at some specific examples of different NFTs that are out there, just to give you an idea of the landscape and variety that can be purchased. Here we have NBA's Top Shot. This is probably one of the most famous platforms. It allows fans to purchase, sell, or trade officially licensed, and that's an important thing we'll come back to later, video highlights. It was created from a partnership between the NBA Players Association and a company called Dapper Labs. Dapper Labs is the company behind NBA Top Shot, and NBA Players Association is who arranged for all of the license agreements and the different videos that could be made available. Some of you may have heard of the Kings of Leon NFT. They had an album called NFT Yourself. It was produced by Yellowheart, which is a blockchain company. I shouldn't say it was produced. In the land of music, different people do the production, but the actual blockchain token was done by Yellowheart. In connection with their NFT, they also sold 6 golden tickets. And these golden tickets were auctioned off and guaranteed the owner 4 front row seats to one show of every Kings of Leon headline tour for life. And those six tickets constituted the majority of the sales, or a great majority of it. And the total NFT sale generated over $2 million for Kings of Leon. Any NFTs that they did not sell in their main sale, they burned. That's pretty common in the land of cryptographic tokens, to destroy the ones that aren't utilized. I wouldn't say it, I mean, it certainly doesn't happen every time, but it's not abnormal to do that. It helps preserve the value for those who do purchase the NFT tokens. In the case of Kings of Leon, you saw this interesting blend of melding the tangible world and the intangible world. So you got this NFT that you could hold in your cryptographic token wallet, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. And so you had this musical CD you could actually listen to and that you owned in your wallet, but you also potentially had things that you could do in person with friends, such as take them to the concert based on your different privileges. And you see other NFTs doing that, where you have tiers of things that pair with something that can be done in the real world and something that can be done in the digital universe. And at least from my perspective, I think of that as the bragging rights option. It's not super fun to just tell your friends, oh, I have this really cool thing from Kings of Leon. It's way cooler to say, I got this thing from Kings of Leon, and it also entitles us to have front row seats to the concert. So let's go to the concert. Another artist, Grimes, sold animations that she made on a platform called Nifty Gateway, and she sold those for more than $6 million. So it's definitely something many artists are getting in on. Another famous token was that from New York Times technology columnist Kevin Roose. He wrote a story about NFTs, and then he turned that story into an NFT, which he sold in a charity auction. I think he was a bit surprised that it garnered $560,000, but it did. What did the highest bidder get? They got the token, a profile and a follow-up article, and a congratulations message. Another media entity that did something like this was Jack Dorsey. He sold his first tweet as an NFT for $2.9 million. I don't think his was a charitable gift, though. And then we come to the most famous one, Beeple. Every day, it's the first 5,000 days. This is a piece of digital art made by Mike Winkelman, who's better known as Beeple. He is a South Carolina graphic artist. He's the top 3 most, I don't know what the right word is. He's the artist who's received the most money in his life and is presently living. So he's the highest valued, I guess, one of the highest valued artists in the United States and in the world. And so what he did is, beginning in May 2007, so I'm not quite sure what he was building towards or how he knew NFTs were his end game, but in May 2007, he started posting a digital piece of art every single day. 5,000 days later, or 13 and a half years later, he took all those individual pieces, pulled them together, and made them into this collage that you see on the screen. This collage was minted exclusively for Christie's, the famous art auction house, and the digital collage was sold off, and it realized over $69 million in fees. This was an industry first for Christie's. It was their first cryptographic token to be sold, and it was also the first major art house to do it. And it was Beeple's first time to do that too. So that's what we got for that. And it's sold to a user called Metacovan, and we'll talk a little bit more about Metacovan later. What kind of volume are we talking about? This chart here shows the primary sales in 2021. So as you can see, in January, there were a good number of sales, but they've really escalated over the past year. You see some dips, and we'll talk about why there were some dips later. But at this point, in the past 30 days, we had approximately 125,000 primary sale transactions. And what I mean by primary sale transactions is somebody bought a token directly from the person who minted the token, created the token. A secondary sale, which is what's covered in this screen, is where that person who previously bought a token from someone else resells it. And so the secondary sales market has also been climbing. It's a little bit different looking, and there isn't quite as much volume in it from a sheer numbers standpoint, but there's an incredible amount of volume from a dollar standpoint in this market. So in the past 30 days, we saw about 100,000 sales in the secondary sales market. On this next slide, you see the total US dollar value of the 2021 transactions. As you can see, it's a lot of money. Through the beginning of July, $2.5 billion have been spent on NFTs. And just in the past 30 days, OpenSea, which is the largest NFT trading platform, hit $1.9 billion in its previous 30 days. Just astronomical amounts of money moving around this marketplace. For reference, OpenSea in the previous busiest period of NFTs in the year in March only did 148 million. And in January, they did 8 million. So as you can see, they're just ramping up massively on the sales. And most people believe that this is driven primarily by secondary sales. So, and that would be a situation where somebody sells an NFT for say $50, and in the secondary market, somebody else knows other people who might want it for higher value or have done something to promote it in some way, and then they sell it for $500. And we can talk a little bit more about what the creator might get from that later and why some people really like NFTs. Other people say that this volume is really indicative of a pandemic mindset. People aren't getting around going to galleries. They're not going to people's houses as much to sit around a table and say, oh, look, you got a new piece of artwork. This allows you to have a whole gallery of art or a whole set of different recordings, and to be able to tell your friends, I have this, and there are ways to view other people's wallets, to put them on display so that you can show it off in a digital universe. And so now we get to the technology underlying NFTs. This is the part that some of the people in the room here who are more of the developer, coder, programmer mindset could probably do a lot better than me, but I'll give you the basics. So NFTs utilize programming that's the same as most cryptocurrencies. It rides on a blockchain. The blockchain records the transactions and stores unique owner identification coding on a shared public exchange. In layman's terms, it's a new kind of digital collectible item stamped with a unique bit of code that serves as a permanent record of its authenticity. Most minting for blockchains is done on the Ethereum blockchain, and most tokens are what are called ERC 720 tokens, which is a smart contract standard. And there are different varieties of smart contracts available, and those are the contracts that actually do the minting of the token that dispense it. I kind of think of them as the kiosk that you go to, you put in your currency or you put in your instructions, and then out pops your token. But of course, nothing's done in the physical real world. Other popular blockchains that are gaining traction are Solana and Hedera and other ones as well. Each token resides on its native blockchain. So if you have an Ethereum token, that token lives forever in perpetuity on the Ethereum blockchain, theoretically. And I say theoretically because in many cases, the actual information isn't posted to the blockchain, just a validation of that documentation being created. So there might be a bit that says this token was minted, and that's really all it is. This token was minted on the blockchain, but then that token references to another site that gives you your JPEG or your audio recording or something like that, which resides in an off-chain environment. For those of you who are listening to this and thinking, oh, good for them, those people can do NFTs. This is so hard. There's no way I could ever do it. Not true. My husband is a visual artist. He makes large-scale oil paintings. This picture that you have here on your screen is one of his paintings. And I went to him one day and I said, you know, I've been doing a lot of work on NFTs. You should have an NFT of your art. And he went, you're right. And he said, maybe you can help me with it someday. And I was like, yeah, sure. And to be honest, I'm a fintech attorney, but I am not the most techie person ever. And I was kind of dreading helping him because I wasn't imagining the process being particularly simple. And then I said, you know, when do you want to sit down and do this? He was like, I already did it. And I was like, what do you mean you already did it? He's like, I went to OpenSea and I just followed the instructions. They had very simple step-by-step instructions and I did it. Now, he had a few little incidents along the way where both of us couldn't quite figure out how to get certain pieces to work. But they were the sort of thing that it was easy to Google and say, I don't understand why this isn't working. And it was fixed. And so I think all in, it probably took a combined hour to put the NFT up. It wasn't a very challenging process. So even if you're not the most tech savvy person, it's available. Here's some of your famous NFT platforms right now, some of the most popular ones. We have OpenSea, that's the little sailboat in the middle. You have Rarible, that's the yellow one. Nifty Gateway, the green one. Super Rare, the black one on the bottom. Mintable, the one that says Mintable, and Wax, the one that says Wax. And you're probably wondering, why do we need all these different platforms? And we perhaps don't need all of them, but it's a little bit like going to Walgreens or CVS or Target versus going to Publix or some other store. So each platform allows different things to happen. And some of the platforms, your tokens are tethered to the platform, which means that if you buy a token on that platform, you can only sell the token on that platform. While that might be fine right now, what happens if the platform goes away? If that company doesn't survive, then you have a token that you will likely still have the JPEG or audio file associated with it, but you have no way to commoditize it or monetize it. So there's a push in some circles to have more untethered platforms where the token itself could be moved off the platform into some sort of hardware wallet or sold on other exchanges. For example, Rarible and OpenSea have an agreement where OpenSea's NFTs can be sold on Rarible as well, although some of the features might not transfer. When I speak of features, some of them allow the original creator to have commissions. And that's a real benefit to a lot of artists because, as I'm sure a lot of you know, you have your musicians, you have your artists, you have your other creative types. And while they might make a decent amount of money from selling their creative work product, a lot of times the people who make the real money in the arena are the secondary buyers. So, for example, you have an artist that sells a $1,000 piece of art to a collector. That collector, who happens to run in refined circles and know other high-value collectors, finds another collector who says, "Oh, I love that piece. Can I buy it?" And the collector says, "Of course you can. It's $1 million." The collector says, "No problem. Here's $1 million." And so the person who bought the piece of art for $1,000 just made $999,000 by selling it to somebody for $1 million. And as all of you know, what amount of money did the artist get from that? Exactly nothing, except for that first $1,000. In the case of NFTs, the original creator of the NFT can often set, depending on the platform, a commission structure associated with that token. So then if it were a digital NFT in the same scenario I did, say the artist set a 10% commission on it, they would sell their NFT for $1,000, minus of course some platform fees. They would sell it for $1,000 to the art collector. And then the art collector, when they sold it for $1 million, would only get $900,000 because $100,000 of that would go to the artist since the artist set a 10% commission. And that would keep happening at every single subsequent sale for the life of that token. So you can imagine if a piece of art were to change hands 20 times, that an artist would have really a reoccurring revenue stream associated with that would be really valuable and very different from the current market for art and music, where a lot of times the creative person is not the one who gets a substantial chunk of the money. All right, moving on to the next screen. If you're kind of wondering what these NFT platforms look like, I thought I would just give a little screenshot of both of them. The one on the left is a screenshot of the Rarible marketplace. The one on the right is a screenshot of the Infinite marketplace. The Infinite marketplace is a little bit different from some of the others. They offer different forms of validation for physical items. So for example, they offer traditional NFTs, but they also offer things like you might be able to get a special edition tennis shoe and you have an NFT of a picture of that tennis shoe or the diagram of that tennis shoe that is tethered to the physical tennis shoe. So then if anybody says later, "I don't think that's the special limited edition tennis shoe," they can say, "Oh, it is. I can prove it on the blockchain." And all you have to do is scan this near-far communication chip to see that chip is tethered to the blockchain so that you can see that this is the actual shoe that was the limited edition run. I said a lot already about minting NFTs. So from the technological perspective, minting is simply the process of documenting the digital ownership and creating the unique certificate of authenticity. Minting can be a really expensive process though. Most minting, as I mentioned earlier, is done on the Ethereum blockchain. And in order to get the Ethereum blockchain to mint something, you have to pay the Ethereum miners money to do so. And the miners are not people. They're not sitting in a room waiting on this. They're a bunch of computers waiting for amounts of money to be provided to them to do certain computational processes in order to mint a token. And at different points in time in the past year, that amount has surged greatly. And that's part of why I think we've seen the dip at different times in the year in the value and the volume of NFTs being sold, is that at different points in the year, the average gas cost for an NFT went from $4.50 for a token to $45 a token. So that's pretty drastically different. Now, that's not really a big deal if you're trying to sell a $60-some million Beeple piece of art, but it's a lot bigger deal if you're trying to sell a $1 audio recording of a song that you as a musician have recorded and are trying to get traction with. At that point, $4.50 doesn't even make sense. So what we have seen is an attempt to pivot away from putting everything directly on the Ethereum blockchain or the other blockchain at issue, and having these things called side chains or layer 2 protocols and any number of other technological things that every time I read them, my eyes glaze over and I think I do not understand most of these words. But the long and short of it is this. They run in parallel to the Ethereum blockchain. They have more information on them on the Ethereum blockchain, but at certain points in time, they usually post data up to the Ethereum blockchain for posterity. And so you have this kind of trail of breadcrumbs that you can follow to ensure that something is still in place and still legitimate. And these different side chains have their own consensus algorithms. They can be proof of authority, delegated proof of stake, Byzantine fault tolerance, all sorts of different things. And they connect to the Ethereum chain or the other chains via a two-way bridge. So what do you do if you purchase an NFT? How do you keep your NFT safe? As I'm sure many of you are aware, there have been some tremendous hacks in the cryptocurrency world where hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars have just disappeared from wallets online or elsewhere. And then you also have one of my favorite stories is the guy who lost his key to his wallet and asked for permission to dig through an enormous municipal landfill to try to find the key because he believed he had approximately $400 million on that piece of paper that had the private key in the landfill. And so how can you keep your NFT safe? The first thing you can do is on your platform, you can do two-factor authentication and ensure that you enable that. That helps to ensure that nobody else can get into your account, or if they are trying to, you get notification of it. Then you can move your NFT from the platform if it's untethered. If it's tethered, you can't move it. If it's untethered, you can move it to a hardware wallet. Those are referred as cold wallets, and they're just flash drives usually. Or you can move them into multiple wallets. So if you had 5 NFTs, instead of keeping them all in one wallet where they would be subject to being stolen, you could put them into hot wallets on other sites or cold wallets or a combination thereof so that you diversify your risk profile and they're not all aggregated. I think of that a little bit like having multiple bank accounts. You'll also always want to check that the NFT marketplace address is legitimate and not accidentally type in the wrong thing. You want to avoid phishing and impersonation attempts where you might give them your password, and then they would be able to log into the system and take away your beautiful NFTs. Next, we come to the topic I deal with the most, and that is with the legal issues. And there are a lot of legal issues with NFTs. They're not a very clear-cut product. I gotta say, it seems a lot easier to sell something like a playing card than to handle selling NFTs, but there are issues in the playing card arena too. So the top areas are intellectual property rights and security law. You also have to worry about terms and conditions. So every platform has its own terms and conditions. That's the little click to accept box that you see that says, in order to use this platform or by using this platform, you've agreed to these terms of use. And then you click the little button, usually without ever reading the hyperlink that has a 20-page document associated with it, and you go into the platform. So these terms and conditions are specific to the platform. So in my mind, at least, and this has not been litigated yet, it's very clear those terms and conditions bind the creator of that token. So if you go into the Rarible platform and create a Rarible token, you're going to be bound by Rarible's terms and conditions with respect to that token. What I think is harder is if you have a token that is untethered and it leaves the platform. So say you took a token out of the Rarible platform and then you sold it to somebody else, completely separate from Rarible. Say you put it on a flash drive And then you went over to Dawn and said, hey, Dawn, I've got this thing. Do you want it? I can sell it to you for $100. And she says, yeah, that looks great. And she takes it. And I hand her the flash drive. There's usually no real way for her to accept the terms and conditions or any license agreement or things of that sort. So the question becomes, are subsequent purchasers really bound to those terms and conditions? And I think we're just going to have to wait and see on that point. But diving into the intellectual property rights issues, one of the biggest things you want to make sure of in any NFT deal is that whoever created the token had the right to do so. A good example of this would be if I went out and created a Katy Perry NFT with her whole album on it, you should not buy it because I have no rights to distribute anything created by Katy Perry. But it's a little hard in this arena to verify who has the rights to do that. All of these platforms are going to have language in them that a creator has the rights to do it, and they indemnify the platform for any issues that arise out of the failure to have appropriate intellectual property rights in the good produced. However, that doesn't really protect the buyer. And so it's a bit hard in this environment to really validate that somebody has the ability to do that. And I think that's part of the reason why Christie's was able to garner such a high amount with the Beeple sell is people trusted Christie's. They trusted that Christie's knew that the art was actually created by Beeple and that the person creating the token and distributing the token had the right to do so. So I think people trusted that Christie's had vetted it. I think it's a little similar with NBA Top Shot, and part of the reason why it's gotten so valuable is because it was done in connection with the NBA Players Association. So you knew that the NBA, at least, and the players in the NBA had signed off on this documentation. What I don't know, and I'm a little bit curious about with Top Shot, are things like a person in the back of the video. How does that fit into it? Or say there's a situation, and I don't know if this exists, I'm just creating a hypothetical here, but you have this awesome basketball moment. And so it was created into an NFT. But in the background, somebody's walking back to their seat and they slip and fall. What happens if that person says, hey, you didn't have a right to make this NFT of me, and you've only gotten the permission from the Players Association? I think it's a little unclear what happens in those scenarios. And we're all still trying to figure out how the intellectual property rights will generally work in this arena. There's a general rule that they're copyrights, and the creator of the original work has created the copyright. And so with copyrights, your big thing is license agreements. In this case, say I bought an NFT of the Disney logo. Well, all I have is a digital representation of the Disney logo. And unless Disney has granted me rights to do something with it, I can't go around and create t-shirts and sell them with the Disney logo on them. But if Disney has given me the right to do that, I might be able to. So a lot of this comes down to those license agreements. And then we loop back to the thing I just said about how terms and conditions pretty obviously bind, in my mind, the creator of the platform, but it's a little unclear for subsequent purchasers. Same thing with the license agreements. If you're the third person down on the purchase list, how do you know what license agreement was associated with that NFT token? All of these things are created by smart contracts, which are simply computer code. They don't actually send you in your email box, these are the terms and conditions associated with this, or have some sort of legend printed on the token that tells you how you can use it or what you can do with it. So that's another area where it'll be a little challenging. Most of the licenses that are out there right now do allow for transfer of the token. So if I receive the token, I can then sell it on to someone else. Many of them do not allow for things like a musical compilation, like for me to take 10 different artist NFTs and smush them together and call it my own. But it remains to be seen if that's really appropriate for them to do that or not, and how that's going to work in reality. The other big ticket item to worry about with NFTs from a legal perspective are securities law considerations. Offers and sales of securities in the US must be made pursuant to an effective registration statement filed with the SEC or fall within the exempt categories. The exempt categories that are available are things like private offerings to a limited number of people or institutions, an offering of a limited size, intrastate offerings. And what I mean by that is if you just sell securities within the state of Kentucky, then it would be subject to Kentucky's blue sky laws and not necessarily federal laws, assuming you fit the exemption. and securities of municipal, state, and federal governments. So there are 4 buckets of exemptions, but a lot of those aren't going to be applicable if you're minting a bazillion different NFT tokens. So then we look at things, we look to see whether or not it would qualify as a security. And the way that most federal courts in the United States evaluate whether or not something is a security is through something called the Howey test. And the Howey test dates back to 1946. So it's definitely not discussing tokens specifically. Instead, it was about an offering of units of a citrus grove development. And in connection with that offering of units in the orange grove, there was a contract for cultivating, marketing, and then remitting the net proceeds to the investors. And in the Howey test, they looked at 4 criteria: an investment of money, common enterprise, reasonable expectations of profits, and efforts of others. And so for that, I think of it this way. An investment, that's a pretty easy one to hit. I give you $100. Check, we've done that. Common enterprise, other people give you $100. We're all investing in the same thing. Okay, we've got that. Reasonable expectation. We are giving you $100 because based on statements you've made or other criteria, we think that $100 is going to turn into something worth $150 in your hands. And then the efforts of others, that's the in your hands part. I'm going to sit and do nothing, and you're going to do something that drives up the value. So that leads us to one of the bigger concerns in NFTs from a security standpoint: split ownership concerns. So for example, if you're buying an NFT that's kind of like a Beanie Baby or a piece of art, you go in, you buy it because you like it. You just want it for yourself. You want to look at it. You think it's pretty. That is not going to be a security if you're the sole owner and you own it and you bought it for personal use. However, say somebody goes in and says, I have a really great racing horse, and my racing horse has a fantastic revenue stream. I'm going to do an NFT of the revenue stream associated with my racing horse. And I'm going to sell it to 10 different people. And then whatever proceeds we get from the racing horse, we're going to share. That's definitely a security. Now you get to the more complicated thing. I'm actually selling the horse, but it's an expensive horse. It costs $5 million. And so 10 people come together to buy this horse. And the way you know this horse is part of this NFT is, say you get a digital representation of this horse and you have proof of ownership via this digital NFT. And then the horse might have a small little microchip in it that ties to that. Well, those 10 people coming together to buy that horse are participating in a common enterprise. And they're making a collective action to purchase this horse. That is also likely to be a security. So there are different risks in that. And some of this also comes down in the NFT arena to how the platform sets it up. So as I mentioned, every platform has different features. Some platforms will not allow fractionalization of their NFTs. They can only ever be sold to one individual. Now, there are scenarios where they might not know. Like, for example, if me and 6 of my buddies get together and I sit down with them and say, hey, let's do this. And then one of us goes in and buys it. And then we have paperwork that says we're splitting the proceeds. You can put in your terms and conditions that people can't do that, but that part's a little bit hard to police. And I'm curious to see what the securities regulators will say and do on that front. But where you have a platform that does allow fractionalization, it's a more clear-cut situation. And this picture here is Metacovan's Twitter picture for his image. Metacovan was the buyer of the $69 million Beeple. The reason we're looping back to him right now is because he owns a lot of Beeple's work, and he took part of his collection of Beeple's work and fractionalized ownership of it and sold it with a special token called the B20 coin. To my knowledge, nothing happened with Metacovan for that, but who knows what will happen over time. We don't have any official guidance from the SEC on NFT tokens. It has been requested. A company called Sustainable Holdings sent in a guidance letter in April and said, hey, we'd really like to know how these things fit into your regulatory regime. And to my knowledge, that has not been responded to. So we keep waiting for a response on that front. However, Chairman Gensler this summer has been talking more and more about how the SEC really believes the blockchain tokens are securities and many of them should be registered with the SEC. So not surprisingly, with this lay of the land, we have some litigation on this front. And this litigation is the Dapper Labs litigation. There is a woman who is working with a boutique law firm in New Jersey, and they have filed seeking class action status against Dapper Labs. Dapper Labs, again, is the group behind NBA Top Shot. She alleges they sold unregistered securities via the NBA Top Shot marketplace, and that she and other members of the class lack sufficient expertise to evaluate the risks. For those of you wondering how evaluating the risk fits into this, under SEC regulations, you have lots and lots of disclosures of risk associated with it. I actually find them relatively amusing personally to read. I'm not often the one that drafts them. I have a lot of colleagues who spend more time doing that than me. But when I read them, the long and short of it is it's 7 pages usually or less of documentation that says this might not be worth anything. What you're buying might not be worth anything. So she says that she lacks sufficient expertise to evaluate the risk, and so did others. And these NBA Top Shots were securities. And I can see her argument. One of the things she focuses on is that the only way these NBA Top Shot moments become really worth anything is if the platform promotes them and does a lot with them. And so she alleges that there's a common enterprise between her and the platform in ensuring that these different tokens go up in price. Right now, we're at the very early stages of it. The judge is about to rule in the next, call it 60 days, on whether or not a class is appropriate for a class action in this scenario. We also haven't made it past any venue challenges, and I think there could be some venue challenges here simply because the defendant resides in Canada. So I'm curious to see what they'll say about that. All that to say, the Howey test that we just mentioned, we're a little bit away from hearing how this fits into that and to having a court ruling on it if it ever gets reached. You're probably already thinking there's a lot of legal issues with that. This little bubble here shows the more issues. There's a lot more issues in the legal arena for this. Those issues are things like the Uniform Commercial Code. How does that, and what I mean by the Uniform Commercial Code, some of you might be familiar with that, but general physical goods are, and any definition of goods, they don't actually have to be physical, but goods fit into the UCC, and there are rules about acceptance of goods, delivery of goods, different things like that that are pretty uniform throughout the United States. And what we don't know is how NFTs will fit into that regime. Privacy issues, you're legally required to have a privacy notice for anything you're doing with data. And all of these platforms have some aspect of data associated with them. They're in many ways, they're like eBay. You have consumer protection issues. These platforms are selling tokens directly to individuals, and just like any other business that sells directly to people, you have consumer protection issues. Then you also have some of the more exotic, interesting things like Bank Secrecy Act concerns of know your customer and anti-money laundering. The art world has dealt with anti-money laundering issues for years. It's a great way to move money illegally without notice, is to buy a piece of art and sell it to someone else. And in the same way, there's concern that as NFTs are rising in price, that people might do that with NFTs. And so figuring out how that will fit into this environment is interesting, because if you buy an NFT that's, say you buy an NFT for $50 million and you sell it online for Bitcoin worth $50 million, well, now you have $50 million worth of Bitcoin that you can do whatever you want with. And Bitcoin is one of the top currencies used on the darknet. It's always a little surprising to me because Bitcoin is fairly trackable. It's anonymous, but it's only anonymous if you don't know who the wallet is tethered to. Once you know who the wallet address is tethered to, it's not anonymous anymore. And there are other cryptocurrencies that are anonymity enhanced. And so I'm always surprised Bitcoin is used as much as it is on the dark web, but I digress on that point. The point is, this could be a way to move value for dodgy folk who want to move value outside of the banking system where they would be noticed. So all of these platforms are having to think about things like, do we know who's purchasing our tokens and creating our tokens? Are there monetary limits on how big the tokens or what the value of the token can be when it's sold? How does that fit together? In connection with all of these money questions, or questions about whether or not some of these platforms and token creators qualify as money services businesses or money transmitters, which are specific regulated things. But think of it like this. Anybody who's moving money from person A to person B that is not person A handing it to person B might be a money transmitter. And not surprisingly, because it involves the outflow of money, those are regulated entities that have to meet certain requirements and follow certain rules and regulations and have insurance things and stuff like that. There's also the New York BIT license regime, and it remains to be seen what other state level concerns will come about. But in New York, they have put in a regime called BIT license regime, which has an incredibly broad definition of what is subject to regulation there. So what you see a lot of companies doing in the blockchain and cryptocurrency world is geofencing off New York just to try to avoid it. There have been several dozen companies that have registered under the regime, but it is not an inexpensive process, and it's a pretty protracted process. And next we come to everybody's favorite, tax issues. How do you tax these things? So their NFTs are just like other cryptocurrencies. They're subject to short-term and long-term capital gains taxes. So if you buy it and you sell it a couple days later, it's going to be subject to your ordinary income tax rate, which might be 12% to 37% this year. If you keep it for over a year, it's going to be subject to capital gains long-term rates, which are 0 to 20%. One exception to this is whether or not you're wealthy and it's a collectible. If it qualifies as a collectible and you make more than $441,000 a year, then you might be taxed at the collectible rate, which is higher than the normal long-term capital gains rates. Sales tax, the thing most states love and are trying to always apply, is completely undetermined at this point, how these things fit into that. So I'm sure several states will start saying NFTs are subject to sales tax, but we don't have an answer on that yet. So all that leads to this great gray landscape where nobody really knows the answers to anything, but there are people here trying to figure out things, which I think is a great segue into questions, which I would love to take.
That was a fascinating whirlwind look at what we could get into if we jump into this world. I had a question. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about like what happens if particularly with the artist world where someone dies along the way. Then what happens to the copyright as it relates to the NFT? Like, so you have someone who is deceased now, their artwork is being traded and so on. Does that have an impact?
Yeah, I think it would still have an impact in the sense of the estate would be able to get the subsequent proceeds of the sales. But that assumes a few things. That assumes that before the artist passed, they gave somebody the wallet address. So all of these smart contracts are automatic. And so what the smart contract has coded into that token is every time you change hands, money goes to this other wallet. It doesn't say money goes to this person or money or an email gets sent to somebody that says, hey, you're entitled to $10,000. Where would you like us to deposit it? It goes to a specific wallet. So the artist is going to need to have told people and their family, friends, will, wherever, I have a wallet here. This is where the proceeds from this go. And then the money would go there. And then from the standpoint of the token can continue trading hands because people it would be subject to whatever the license was originally.
Do we have any other questions? Please enter them in the chat and we'll answer. Okay. Well, thank you. Let's see, we have one question, I believe. Let's see. What type of work can your firm perform for those of us in the blockchain space?
That's a great question that I love to answer. Anything. We can do anything in the blockchain space. We have lots and lots of clients across this entire ecosystem. So if your company is looking, or if you're looking to set up a mining farm in Kentucky and take advantage of some of the electrical tax related benefits that have recently come into effect, we can help do that. If you have some property you want to lend out or want to rent out to some miners, we can help with that. If you have a protocol and you need to figure out what the intellectual property rights are associated with your protocol and how to ensure that your employees are assigning those rights to you, that's something we do. You want to be a token issuer, we can help you evaluate if your issuing entity should be a US entity, a foreign entity, how many entities should be part of that process, and how to structure it. If you have a token already, we can evaluate if that's a security token. As many people know in the space, most of the large cryptocurrency exchanges will not allow a token to trade on their platform unless there is some sort of note from an attorney that says this security is most likely not a token, as this token rather is most likely not a security. These different cryptocurrency exchanges don't want to be accused of acting as buyers and sellers or providing a platform that allows buying and selling of securities, because that would be subject to registration as well, and they don't want to do that. So they ask for these memoranda, and that's something that we do regularly. And we also help with plain vanilla terms and conditions and privacy policies and things like that for any sort of electronic platform.
Well, thank you so much, Courtney. This has been very, very informative and makes you start thinking about what you should be getting into, right? So we'll get back with you in the future to follow up when, another, say, 8 or 9 months have gone by and where we're headed, right? So I look forward to speaking in the future. And thank you so much for being a part of Techfest today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dawn. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.